Hello everyone, what's up? Prince15 here with another review of the Acolyte. Today we are taking a look at episode Doesn't Exist because the series is dead. Oh boy. So yeah, I'm doing a video about this, and it'll go in the playlist of all the other Acolyte reviews, because I think this is probably, it'd be a nice little bow on all those reviews I did. So, in case you weren't aware, according to, I'm pretty sure it's Deadline, sources that they have are telling them that the Acolyte has been canceled after just one season. Now, when I initially saw this news, I didn't really believe it. It's like, oh, it's another one of those, comicbook.com or other really clickbaity nerd culture websites trying to just, they're just doing their thing. They're trying to clickbait and, get people to click on their headlines. So at first I didn't believe it, but then about 20 seconds later, I noticed that the source was, the original source was from Deadline. And I'm like, oh shoot, they're like one of the three reputable Hollywood news sites. It's like in my book, it's Deadline, Variety, and the Hollywood Reporter. Those are like the big three. That it's like if they say something, then it's more than likely true. Because I think they were the ones that had Rosario Dawson as Ahsoka Tano. I don't know. I don't remember which one specifically, but it's like it's one of those three that had Rosario Dawson as Ahsoka Tano, and Tim was coming back as Boba Fett, and other Star Wars things in the past. So if information is coming from them, at least in my experience, it seems like it's pretty reputable that this is true. So now I could still see a situation where maybe this isn't true and everyone's just kind of freaking out right now. But considering where the original source is coming from, I'm kind of inclined to believe it right now. So unless something happens between when this video goes up and some sort of later date, who knows when that would be. Yeah, seems to be that the show's dead. So obviously there's lots of mixed reactions about that online. I'm here to give my 2 cents, as obvious by the fact that this video exists. Didn't think this video would have to exist, but here we are. So yeah, the show is dead, and I'm kind of unhappy about that. Now, clearly, I was not the biggest fan of this show. I think if you listen to after like the first 2 episodes, I get pretty critical of it pretty quickly. I'm like, why are you? This is weird. Everything just kind of fell apart and seemed off to me after the third episode. Like the third episode was where things started to get off the rails. That first flashback episode, but even then, I kind of was noting some sort of kind of weird things. I somehow never brought it up in all of my reviews, I don't think. But like even the first episode has what I think is this really weird moment where Soul ends up saving Osha from falling off that ledge to her icy doom, and he uses the Force on her, and it's treated like this big moment, strangely enough. Like it's the first time that Soul has used the Force, because there's like they rest on it, and like they're trying to, like, the fact that he is, oh my gosh, he managed to save her, oh, and look at that, he's mastered the Force. It's like it's I don't know, that moment felt really weird to me, and I remember sitting there scratching my head going, oh, that's a little odd, but I kind of pushed it off to the side. I'm like, well, I mean, everything else is fine. So, I mean, is that even worth mentioning as a weird moment? So I never really mentioned it, but so even the first episode has like has that kind of strange, weird moment in it where it's like, why? It's like, I mean, okay, revealing he can use the Force is not a dramatic reveal show. He's a Jedi. We know he can use the Force. It's like, how many new people were you expecting to get in with this show that they don't even know what the Force is, that this is a surprise that this character can do this? But even then, it shouldn't be a surprise, because the whole opening is that scene between May and Master Indara, where there's some Force flips and kicks and some floats and and stopping blades with the Force and all that stuff. So I mean, it's not like this is the first time the Force has been used in this show. It's not a surprise that this character is a Jedi. So I'm so that moment was really weird, but I kind of gave it a pass. Like, oh, okay, whatever. So clearly, it was a flawed show. There were these odd issues with it. I was pretty critical of it, but at its core, I still think there's good ideas there. I think there were good character moments. I think there was some good acting. I just think it got really muddled in the presentation, and it kind of all ended up falling flat because of that. It's like there was just a lot of poor editing choices done, and that for me is really what killed the show. So the fact that they've decided not to renew it for season 2, I guess I'm not surprised at in this current day and age, but I'm extremely disappointed. Because as I said in my review for the last episode 8, I was like, there's still clearly story left to be told here. They basically set up a new season. They tease Yoda at the very end, and that's another reason why I think ending on that this is another reason why ending on that Yoda shot was a stupid decision. Why I was kind of critical of it and critiqued it when I talked about that episode. It's like, why did you end on the obvious tease? Because now you've gone and Green Lanterned yourself, where you set up this thing and it's the last thing you end on, and then the sequel's never happening. Like it was the bad guy. I guess he wasn't the bad guy yet, but he's like one of Green Lantern's big bad guys. And then like the after credit scene was him putting on the yellow ring and becoming the bad guy that everyone knows him for. And of course, Green Lantern famously did not do well, and no sequel ever happened. So that Yoda thing's kind of the same thing, where it's like you tease, oh, we're gonna have Yoda next time, everyone, and then no, you're not, because you're not getting another season. The show getting canceled, it's like, I guess I kind of understand it, because there were some, and I don't know if they were leaked or if like they were official reports, but there was data going around last week or something like that of the Nielsen ratings, which for anyone that doesn't know, the Nielsen, they're like one of the big groups, if not the group, that like charts television ratings and etc. And it's a very in-depth, complicated process about where and how they get their data. So it is one of those things where it's like you just kind of have to trust that it's correct, and they could just be making it up because there's not really a way to fact check it. You just have to kind of trust them at their word when they say, we know what we're doing and here's how we arrived at our data. But there was this data going around from them that was showing the Acolyte's viewing figures, and it was comparing that with other Star Wars streaming shows. And yeah, it's interesting seeing those numbers, because I didn't take a hard, long look at them. I just kind of took a glance, but the glance I had is like, yeah, there was a significant drop-off of viewers over time. It wasn't like the first 2 episodes had, because the first 2 episodes did pretty well. And then the 3rd episode did okay, and then the 4th episode did okay, and the 5th episode did okay, and then it was like diminishing returns upon diminishing returns upon diminishing returns, where the viewing figures just kept dropping until you get to the last episode, and it's like there was the show had shed a good amount of its audience at that point. So I mean, if you are a network looking at the show, it's like, well, clearly, it didn't. We failed to find a broader audience with this. It has a audience, because there's a lot of people, being very vocal about the show on Twitter and stuff, but Twitter doesn't necessarily represent real life. But still, it's like it's a Star Wars thing. You're going to find your Star Wars fans that still like this. So clearly, there is there are some people that like this, but for the Disney executives, clearly it was not enough to warrant another season. And if another season was going to be more like what we got, with maybe just an improved story structure, I understand their decision, as much as I don't like it, because this show cost, and again, I can't remember if this was a leak or if it was like an actual officially released number, but this show cost something like $200 million to make. So this costs as much as a Marvel movie to produce, and which to a degree, I kind of look at it and I go, well, I mean, you got 8 episodes. That is actually longer than a Marvel movie. So yeah, so I mean, so in some way you got more bang for your buck, but at the same time, it was also you could also see a little bit of like the cheapness in it because like I even commented like during my reviews, it's like, yes, they keep returning to the same exact place. It's only as if they had enough budget for one set this entire episode. Um, so another season costing $200+ million to make, and you're only going to get this certain amount of viewers. Again, if I'm one of the Disney executives, I understand their decision to can it. Now, do I agree with the understanding and agreeing with the decision is a different thing. I don't think the show should have been canceled because, like I said, there's clearly more story to tell here. However, I also don't think that the show needed or should have, kept a gigantic, humongous budget like that. Like, what if you trimmed, I don't know, 100 million off of that, and you really stripped down? Because sometimes I feel like the what's the saying? Necessity is the father of invention. That's what it is, and that kind of applies here. Where, let's say you're Leslie Hyland and her writing team, and you've been told that yes, you will get a season 2. However, your budget is going to be extremely limited. So we're cutting it in half, if not more. So some of these things that you'd plan to do, like the Starship battle you have planned for episode 6, no, you got to cut that. And so now you've got to work around a bunch of other. You got to work around a whole bunch of other, things that to make your story work now. In some ways, especially with how this first season went, I think that could maybe, having some limitations like that could have maybe helped this writing team. It's like, okay, you can't do this, and this just for budget reasons. So you really have to keep, because like I said, with this first season, and now the only season, at its core, the ideas behind like the interpersonal struggles and stuff, and the conflict between the characters, all of that I thought was strong. They just kept losing me with the pacing. So if they had a second season that was, like another, that was like, another 8 episodes, but it like all focused on Quimir and Osha and Darth Plagueis on the island, and that like that's it, and like maybe we don't even go back to the Jedi Temple for a second season, then maybe that allows the writers to focus a little bit more on the characters, really delve deep into the lore and teachings of the Sith. And as I was saying with the end of the first season, it's like, that's why it's like, why did you end on Yoda? That's such a stupid idea, because the idea of reversing the roles and having your ending shot being on the bad guys triumphant but standing there like the heroes usually do, that's such a bold decision to end a Star Wars thing on. And actually following through on all that, I think you could have had a really stronger second season if it had been more scaled back, and that's what you had focused on. It's like, and then, it's like, and the Jedi Temple subplot maybe could have still been there, but just not. Again, the focus really needed to be on them on the island, doing Sith stuff. So I think this really just seems to me, it's just another, and I think this is less an issue with Disney per se, because I've seen a lot of people blaming Disney, because it is unfortunate. No matter whichever way you spin this, is that it is unfortunate, because unfortunately, this show, whether it was justified or not, kind of became a political flashpoint, where there were people going, this show leans this way politically, and I don't like that. Whether or not the show actually leaned that way, that's up to your interpretation. But clearly, some people were annoyed with it because of that. And then you had the other people on the other side going, well, what's wrong with it leaning this way politically? And then there's other people going, this show isn't leaning anyway politically, which I'm kind of more in that camp. I'm like, okay. So you've got Asian people in the cast, whatever. Clearly there was a big political flashpoint around the show, and it became this focal point for people arguing over that. And this was just kind of the topic of the week to debate the same things over and over and over on the online spaces. And so it kind of became this unfortunate casualty in this online culture war. So with Disney having canceled the show, whether it was for this reason or not, it now does seem like that they are canceling it because they're like, okay, well, that didn't, going quote unquote woke didn't work for us, so now we're canceling it. So whether or not that was the intention or the reason behind the cancellation, which I personally don't think that's the reason, it does now come off that way. For me, I mean, it seems obvious this was an expensive show to make. It didn't get the viewing figures they needed, and especially after all the backlash online, they're just kind of ready to, wash their hands of this and be done with it. Now, like I've been saying, I don't agree with that decision. I think you easily could have just scaled back a second season and finished the story. But it's, to me, this just seems like it seems like an issue beyond Disney, and this is just more another casualty of the streaming model is just not really sustainable to the degree that a lot of these networks and studios want it to be. Because, I mean, for starters, it's like, why did this show need to cost the amount of money it did? Because looking at the budget, like it's $200 million. I mean, that's a movie, and there are some shows that warrant that price tag. Your really large, extravagant, HBO type shows like Game of Thrones or The Last of Us, stuff like that. And if you're going to do a live action Star Wars show, it probably does warrant a slightly larger budget than normal. But does every Star Wars thing need to have such a huge, gigantic budget? And how is it? And another question is it being spent well? And this goes beyond just Star Wars. This kind of goes towards a lot of streaming things out there right now. You look at a lot of the streaming services, and they're pumping out 8 episodes for a whole year, and they're these ridiculously expensive enterprises. And they're put on a streaming service that a lot of them are which constantly jacking up their prices to deal with their not only inflation but also their ballooning budgets, and because of that, a shrinking viewer base. So it's just it's getting to the point where I'm looking at all this and I'm like, none of this, like, everything's too expensive. Something has to give, and I think canceling shows like The Acolyte is one of those things that has to give. Disney is now finding themselves in a Netflix position at this point where things are going to start getting the axe because of how expensive they are. Because Netflix is not shy about canceling shows. They've given shows the axe that have only had like a season or 2 seasons and have left their stories on a cliffhanger. I mean, they've done that I don't know how many times. And they do it quite often. So to me, it just would make sense that maybe you start to scale back a little bit, and if you're one of these big streamers, and maybe this is part of that, because a lot of you can also look at Marvel, which is kind of the sister studio to Lucasfilm, because they are the subsidiaries of Disney corporate, and they were these pre-existing companies that got gobbled up and everything. And I look at what's going on at Marvel, and I see a lot of the same things going on, where suddenly, there for a couple years, there was a whole lot of stuff. Oh, we're doing television. We're talking a whole lot about television. And it's the same thing. You're getting these 8-episode seasons that come out in a year, and that's it for the year. And then it takes forever for the next season to get going, like Loki, where it's like, yeah, we did eventually get the second season of Loki, but it took like 2 years. It's like, holy cow, that's a long time. It's like, why did it take this long? And part of it is scheduling. I've talked about this a little bit with, I'm pretty sure, Bad Batch, where it's like some of this has to do with scheduling. I have no data to back that up. That's just me observing. It's like, well, you don't want to put out everything at once. I mean, some of it it definitely has to do with scheduling. It would not surprise me if some of these things sit in the can for 6 months and they just wait for the right opportunity to release it to give everything else its time to shine. But I kind of look at the way streaming works and the way network television works, and I just scratch my head and I go, why can't we have a show like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.? Why can't we have a show like Arrow or The Flash on Disney Plus, where it's like it's 20 episode seasons, and maybe they don't all need to be 20 episode seasons. It's like 13 episodes is fine. I mean, look at the Marvel Netflix stuff. I mean, those were definitely more expensive shows than The Flash or Arrow on the CW for sure. But even so, it was still cheaper to make than a feature film, and you're getting 13-hour-long episodes out of it. That doesn't seem too bad to me. And because I'm just kind of left questioning, like, where is the money going? Because the Acolyte is such a big example of that. It's like, where is the money going? Because it's like, is it to the actors? Is it to, I would assume a lot of it is the visual effects, because I'm sure they're using ILM because it's Star Wars. Why would you not use ILM with Star Wars? I mean, that's the reason ILM was founded. But then there's also this whole thing about, it's like, projects are too rushed nowadays. Whether you're Industrial Light and Magic or Weta or whichever visual effects company you are, you're just kind of rushed nowadays. So, and that's probably another reason why it takes so long for some of these things to come out as well. So I'm assuming a lot of that has to go to the special effects budget. I mean, some of it's definitely going to the practical sets, which is good, and that's why I didn't necessarily complain about them. Oh, they're back at this street corner again, because it's like, well, that's obviously a big expensive set, and that's part of the question of like what they could have done with the second season. It's like, well, do you need a bunch of big expensive sets? Because looking at like all the flashback episodes, it seems like, and maybe they didn't and they just disguised it well, but it did kind of seem like that they built that entire like minor fortress that the witches lived in. It's like it seems like they built the entire compound, and it's like, did you really need to build the entire compound? It's like they had like the main room, they had the big courtyard, they had the girls' room, they had I mean, to me that just seems like a lot of. And then they had like the big chasm area with the power generators that blew up. And so it's like, that just seems like a big expensive set. It's like, I know the volume has gotten a lot of flack for how it's been implemented in some ways, but it's like, well, Mando seems to use its budget pretty well, at least as far as I've been able to tell. I don't see, and there's some things in Acolyte that I think looked better than Mando for having practical sets, like like the courtyard and everything. But it's like the big chasm. It's like, did you build that? Did you actually build that, or was that visual effects? I don't know. I'm left to question like what was digital and what wasn't. It's like, what did you really need to build, and it's like, so it's like, which is the more expensive? So it's like. So yeah, it's like, if for a second season, if you just like filmed on location for 6 weeks and built like a couple smaller sets, maybe maybe that's another way to trim down the budget and helps you focus more on the characters, because you have to make the characters more interesting, because you can't have them running around in these exotic locations fighting CG aliens and stuff. So I don't know. But despite its flaws, yeah, I just don't think canceling the show was necessarily the right move from a storytelling point of view. And it just, this had to have been, if this is true and it is canceled, to me this also this screams last minute decision, because D23 was like 2 weeks ago and they had Acolyte stuff going on there. They announced like 3 books, which I know isn't TV, but still, it's like stuff related to it. They announced like 3 books, and they had, what's his name, Manny Jacinto, who played Comir. They had him like doing a panel about the show there and everything. So it's weird that they do that, and then 10 days later the show's dead. It's like, oh, okay. Well, then why did you? It seems, and like I said, it seems to be a ratings and money issue. Where it's like, this is too expensive for the diminishing returns we got on this. We can't continue with this show as it stands. So for me as a creative, I'm like, okay, well then strip the budget and give them a smaller playground to work with, and maybe they could, do something really creative and inventive to, close out the story. But the suits at Disney, I'm sure, are cutthroat, and so yeah, it just seems like a really weird turnaround to do all that. So I know there's a lot of people like cheering this decision, like, oh, thank goodness the awfulness is gone. But it's like, just because something starts out not great doesn't mean it can't redeem itself. I mean, I think a good example is Iron Fist on Netflix, where it's like that first season. I thought the first season was fine. I didn't love it. I didn't hate it, but a lot of people were like actually actively despised that first season. And then the second season came out, and the people that didn't like the first one were like, "Oh, this is a lot better." And I did agree that the second season, it had a lot. There was some improvement in that second season. It's like, oh yeah, this is a little tighter story, and it does flow a little better, and it feels more entertaining to watch. Where the first season of Iron Fist was so slow and plodding, it was kind of bleh. It's like it felt like they didn't have a lot of story to work with, so they really had to stretch to get those 13 episodes. So I mean, yeah, that happens. Sometimes your first season isn't the greatest. I mean, look at The Office. I mean, it's kind of famously said with The Office, it's like, yeah, the first 2 seasons aren't really that great. They're trying to find their footing. You can just kind of start with the third season and go from there. I mean, it's like, yeah, there's some stuff in the first 2 seasons that are important, but they're not really required. You can kind of start at a different point and go. I mean, that happens with network television shows all the time. So why should streaming shows be any different, other than the fact that they're just so stupidly expensive? So it's like, why? So I'm just sitting here like, why couldn't a second season be this smaller, less expensive thing that could hopefully improve the storytelling? I mean, and like, if you're Lucasfilm and Disney, go, okay, clearly there was, this did not turn out the way we wanted it to. Who's to blame here? It's like the core of the story, everyone kind of agrees. Well, not everyone, but the people that like it agree that the core of the story is good. So what is like the actual major issue here? And to me, that's the editing. That's the way the story's formatted. So maybe that is okay, we have to get rid of some of our writers and look at the people in the editing bay. It's like, okay, who had the final decision on the edit? Maybe you need to go. Maybe this needed to be handled a different way. And if that's Leslie Headland, if she said, part of my intention, and I don't think I've heard her say this, so I'm not trying to put words in her mouth. This is all hypothetical. If she said something along the lines of, it's like, I wanted to play with timelines and create a different narrative experience, then I would say, well, that was clearly a mistake, because you lost a lot of people with that, myself included. But that doesn't necessarily mean that a second season couldn't have, they could have learned their lesson and improved on that and really told an interesting story. Because it's like, you introduced Darth Plagueis in live action for 3 seconds, and when are we going to get back to that? It feels a lot like Solo to me, where that movie came out at a bad time and bombed because it came out at a bad time. Not necessarily because it was a bad movie. I love Solo. Solo's such a great movie, I think. But Solo came out at a bad time, and it did not do well. And they kind of nixed a bunch of these plans that they had moving forward. And anything like kind of involving that has really been stuck in development, because they're like, oh, we're going to do a young Lando show. And then that sat around there for 5 years and no one said anything about it. And then it's like, oh, the Lando show's canceled. And it's like, oh, okay. And then a couple months later, it's like, oh, the Lando show is canceled, but that's only because it's getting turned into a movie. And then it's been like a year plus since they've talked about the fact that the show's getting turned into a movie. It's like, okay, well, when are we going to hear about that? So it's like, is that still happening? And then of course, like, oh, hey, Darth Maul, he shows up again at the end of Solo. That's, and he's teaming up with Kira. That's clearly leading somewhere. And then they've still not told that story fully. And Kira's had to appear in Star Wars comics instead to further along her story, which is fine, because if you're going with the everything Star Wars is canon now, except for like notable exceptions and Lego stuff, then it's like, okay, fine, but it's like clear, but it's like, it's like, this was not what was intended, and we're not, and like I said, we still haven't actually gotten the Maul Kira stuff. That's all been kind of glossed over, and we've just seen her at a different point in time. And now we're getting Kira in Star Wars Outlaws, which, whoo, that game's maybe in trouble, at least optically, for when it's coming out, because it's not coming out at a great time for either A, video games, or B, Star Wars stuff. So I'm going to get it. I'm going to play it. I may end up doing a review on that depending on how I feel about it, because if I just go kind of meh, then I won't do anything. If I think it's fantastic, then I may just go, you know what, I'm glad I played that, and may not do anything on it. But if it's like actually like horrible, then I'm like, I may need to talk about this. So we'll see. But that's not coming out at a great time because of all this. And so I'm just getting all these solo project vibes from Acolyte now. It's like, what's going to happen to those books they announced at D23? Are those going to get canned too? It's because I mean, I would assume not, because it's like whatever. It's like you could probably take the budget for one episode of the Acolyte and make 2 or 3 books. If I would assume, I'm guessing. I don't actually know how much it costs to make a book. I know printing, it's probably pretty expensive, but in terms of like the actual, writing and stuff, it's like, you just got to pay the writer and the editor, I guess. But, and there's no way a single writer can, have that much of a price tag attached. So I'm sure the books will probably still come out and everything. Now, as for, but those were discussed before. As for the future of the show itself, I would imagine somewhere down the line they get back to this. I mean, they kind of have to, because that's part of what I was saying at the end of my review for episode 8. It's like, I mean, there's a great big old, it's not a cliffhanger necessarily, but it's an open-ended ending where clearly there's supposed to be more here. This is not a necessarily satisfactory ending. It is an ending for this chapter, but there's still so many questions left open that it kind of requires a continuation of the story. So I don't know if they're going to get the writing team to do a short run comic series or turn it into a novel like with Clone Wars, or what. We'll probably get something like that, if I had to guess. Realistically speaking, because that's the thing. There is no Star Wars plotline that cannot crop back up later. Pretty much anything and everything Star Wars related does get touched on in some way. I mean, look at stuff from like Clone Wars, Rebels, Ahsoka. It's the way those all interconnect, and a bunch of things going on there. And so I mean, and then like Mandalorian bringing back certain characters and locations. It's like the Star Wars and comics, because like the Darth Vader comics brought back Kitster from Phantom Menace. So it's like the Star Wars universe is, I think, wide enough and malleable enough to where it's certainly possible to bring things to a close, even if a lot of time passes. It's just kind of like the right project in a lot of ways. It's like, it just has to be the right project, and it has to be the right time. So I'm sure we will get a conclusion to this story It's probably going to be in book form if I had to guess. Now, I wouldn't mind them transitioning from this point and making a video game, but video games are expensive, and who would make it? That's the question. So it's like, and it's like, would it just compete with it? Because it's like, okay, I'm sure there would have to be like lightsabers and force powers involved, so that would kind of interfere with like the Jedi series that Respawn works on. So it's like, would the so it's a, what would a different dev studio do? How would they differentiate it from those right now? And even then, Star Wars video games still aren't the most stable thing in the world, because where's that Knights of the Old Republic remake? And it's like, now the one thing I am sure of is that the show is if I'm wrong about this, then I'm going to be flabbergasted. But I am 99.9% positive that the show will not get removed from Disney Plus, like a lot of people are kind of theorizing. And it just get completely written off for tax purposes or whatever, like has happened with a couple other shows. Because not to be rude, and especially to like anyone that worked on those shows or were in those shows or enjoyed those shows for sure. But something like Willow on Disney Plus that Lucasfilm produced, when that got removed, I wasn't necessarily surprised, because again, no offense to anyone involved when making those or if you enjoyed that show, but I'm sorry, does anyone care about Willow? No one cared about Willow in the 80s. They weren't going to care about it now. I knew that show was going to bomb from the moment it was announced. It's like, you have to be a real Lucasfilm nerd to know about Willow. That's about as obscure 80s fantasy gets. I mean, that was like, I think when they brought back, I'm forgetting the name of it, the Dark Crystal, the Jim Henson puppet thing, when they brought that back for Netflix, that made more sense to me than them bringing back Willow. So, Willow getting the Willow ending up the way it ended up, I'm not necessarily surprised with. Now, the fact that it's just like gone, I'm like, ugh. It's like, I don't like anything getting just nuked like that, like any piece of media. Because like there was that what was the name of it? Turner and Hooch. Which wasn't the greatest. I mean, my family and I watched that in like the early days of Disney Plus, when that was one of the few original things on. It was fine. It was kind of cute. It's like I think my major issue with that is that it was stuck between trying to be a more serious cop show while also being a family dramedy with cute dogs. But so yeah, that one not surviving to make a second season, I understood that one too. There's like that National Geographic Jeff Goldblum versus the World or whatever it was called, where he was driving around visiting all those things. Like, that didn't need a second season. That's just him visiting different places, being Jeff Goldblum. But the fact that all of these are like gone forever and they were removed I'm sure they're sitting on a hard drive somewhere at Disney. But the fact that we as the public don't have access to them when they were released on the service, and they're just like gone, and presumably we'll never see them again except for like bootleg rips that people made. And I don't even know why you'd make bootleg rips of Turner and Hooch, the series starring Josh Peck from Drake and Josh. I don't agree with that, but while I don't agree with it, I still kind of understand it from Disney's perspective. But I just don't think they're going to do that with the Acolyte, mostly because it has the Star Wars name attached to it. And it's like them actually, because if they remove the Acolyte from Disney Plus, then as far as I'm concerned, it's removed from canon. Like, they're completely distancing themselves from the project. They are admitting that it's this massive failure. And because it's like, you can't have it be included in canon and not have it accessible for people to experience. Because like pretty much everything else Star Wars canon is either on Disney Plus if you can watch it, or a video game that you can play now, like the Jedi games or the Battlefront games, Well, I guess really just Battlefront 2. Or you can read, and it's like, books. You can go to Barnes Noble and buy novels physically, or you can go on, you can get the ebook versions or the audiobook versions. So it's like pretty much everything. I'm pretty sure like everything in current Star Wars canon is accessible in some way to be experienced. So the idea that if they were to remove the Acolyte from Disney Plus, I'm pretty sure that means it would be just removed from canon, as far as I'm concerned. So that would and it would kind of be unprecedented, honestly, because yeah, they've had their stumbles, they've had their box office failures with Solo and everything. They've had things that haven't gone over too terribly well. Resistance, the animated TV show on Disney XD, that didn't necessarily do too well in terms of critics. It's like, yeah, this is really kind of dumbed down, even for kids, and no one really liked Resistance that much. But even that's there. So if they were to remove Acolyte from Disney Plus, that would be like, I don't think they're gonna do that. If they do, then it's like that isn't totally, like I'm saying, that's a totally unprecedented move. That is just admitting that this was a gigantic failure we should have like never embarked on in the first place. And to me, that is if they do that, then heads have to roll. Someone, it's like someone somewhere has made like massive, like massive mistakes at a managerial level, and that is in the why does Kathleen Kennedy still have a job territory. That I know a lot of Star Wars sites like to go back and forth on all the time. Like, it's because she's ruined Star Wars. It's like I don't know. It's like, yeah, there's been a couple but questionable projects, but like there's just a lot of, they're also just putting out a lot of stuff. There's a lot of volume. It's not like the Acolyte was the first Star Wars project in 10 years and it was awful. Star Wars is constantly popping out stuff nowadays, so it's like okay, not all of them are going to be winners just by the like rules of the volume of the amount that they're putting out. It's just a quality over quantity thing. It's like right now they're kind of focused on quantity rather than quality, in a lot of cases. So it's like, I mean, I always go into Star Wars things hoping that they're going to be good. Most of the time, I get what I want out of these Star Wars projects. It's very rare I've walked away from a Star Wars thing, especially since the post Disney takeover, where I've gone, yeah, that just wasn't good. It's like I can kind of count on one hand things I don't like from the Disney era, and that would be like one novel, Force Awakens, Rise of Skywalker, The Acolyte, and Jedi Fallen Order. Just I didn't think the gameplay was very good. For what it's like, this doesn't. It's like, okay, this gameplay's fine if you're fighting with an actual sword, but this is a lightsaber. It should be doing way more damage than what it's doing. They kind of nerfed the lightsaber for gameplay reasons. But everything else, it's like, even if I have my critiques of them, I've still gotten enough enjoyment out of them that it's like, it's like this era is not terrible that we're in right now. But this, I think, Acolyte getting canceled after one season when it's clear that they wanted to do more is kind of like arguably the most dire situation that Star Wars has been in the Disney era, if you ask me. Because I know people argued about The Last Jedi, but that movie still made lots of money at the box office. Same with Rise of Skywalker, actually. It's like no one was really satisfied with Rise of Skywalker, but it still made its money. But Acolyte does seem to be like the first, like, I would say probably like overall objective failure at Lucasfilm to me anyway. Because like even with Solo, which was a box office bomb, even it was still a good movie. It just came out at a bad time. So, and Book of Boba Fett, a lot of people had issues with that, but I mean, it still did okay with the ratings and everything based on that data I saw. So it's like yeah, the Acolyte just seems to be kind of a low point, and so it's unfortunate. I didn't I didn't plan on making a video like this because I just didn't think that this was going to happen. I assumed that it was probably going to get a second season just based where they left off, because the quality of other things hasn't necessarily dictated that things wouldn't get a second season before. So I'm just a little. So now some people would probably point to something like the Book of Boba Fett, but I'm like, well, I mean, was that really ever supposed to be? Now, I've always said I want a second season of Boba Fett, but that is something where it's like it's always been wishy-washy on whether or not that was supposed to be a separate show, or if it was supposed to be The Mandalorian season 2.5, which that's kind of also where I've been, where it's like, I think this was just supposed to be another season of The Mandalorian, and they just called it something separate, and that kind of didn't help it in terms of expectations, but oh well. So yeah, I've kind of gone long and rambly at this point, so that's just kind of my overall thoughts on like the whole situation. Like I said, it's unfortunate because I think the core ideas behind the show were good. It maybe just needed a different creative team to get those points across better editing, maybe a smaller budget, smaller cast of characters, and everything. So and now we're not going to get that, at least in televised format, which is I think unfortunate, because whatever audience you do have that would have continued watching this show, it's if you finish the story in a book or a comic or something, that's going to shrink exponentially. I mean, you really are going to be reaching only the hardcore of the hardcore Star Wars fans at that point, and some of them didn't like this at all, or maybe so. Yeah, the whole situation's unfortunate, but I think there's still good things on the horizon. The Mandalorian and Grogu, I'm excited for more of that. Andor season 2 next year. A lot of people are looking forward to that. So yeah, there's this is a low point for sure, but I mean, I'm not going to be one of those people on the street corner going, the end is near, Star Wars is dead, blah. It's like, no. Like I said, there's too many Star Wars projects always in development that it's like there's always going to be the good things and the gems just around the corner. I mean, the Star Wars animation team's working on more stuff. We know that. They've said that. So we know that we're going to get some new show from them. Who knows what it's going to be? We'll find out. But yeah, so we and of course Skeleton Crew is out in December and early next year, which I'm really looking forward to that. The first trailer came out after D23, and it gave me the warm and fuzzies, because this does really look like it has a really cool vision behind it. It does feel like Star Wars kind of does E.T. a little bit. It has some of that Amblin Spielberg magic feel to it, kind of a Stranger Things vibe. But in a Star Wars world, there were some people that were like freaking out. It's like, oh, it's Star Wars suburbia. It's like, okay, and I mean, it's like not every planet can be a Coruscant or something. So yeah, I mean, that trailer was really appealing to me. I'm excited to see what that show does. Hopefully, that can be like a nice little breath of fresh air at the end of the year for Star Wars. So anyway, yeah, so that's it for this video. Just kind of my overall thoughts on the situation, and I guess I'll see you guys for Skeleton Crew in December. So if you did watch this whole thing, then thank you for watching. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, all that great stuff. Remember to follow me on Twitter and Instagram. Those links are in the description below, and I will see you guys for Skeleton Crew in December. So thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.